before I finally got this thing figured out, right? So we are doing Ask Me Anything today. Is Wednesday, and I might be welcoming Kitty actually in here. So if you see her, yeah, see, there she is. Oh, Kitty. Ah! Oh my word. Kitty's in the candle. I'm going to move the candle. Yikes. Okay. That's funny because she's usually not that adventurous. All right. I always forget to do that part. All right. So today I'm going to finish up some of the questions that I haven't gotten to yet. One of them has sort of been in the background. It's kind of a loaded question, so I've been sort of waiting on it. But Beth asks, can you discuss living in the divine will of the Blessed Trinity? And the reason that I've kind of held off on that is because it's it's a deep subject. My simple answer is living in the divine will is really as simple as just doing what you're told. I know that especially with some of the apparitions and the prophecies that have come with those in the last 100 years, that there is something specific called the divine will, living in the divine will, and the age of the divine will and all that. And that's kind of a deep subject that I don't really want to get into so much. But that's the simple answer. The simple answer is living in the divine will is just doing what you're told, and it's doing what you're told every moment. And how do I know if I'm in the will of God? Well, first of all, if I'm not in sin, if I am living in grace, and then what I am learning, not that I have learned it, but what I am learning is that God kind of goes along with our choices. You know, nothing is really set in stone. He allows us the leeway to make decisions, and he kind of goes with that. So I say that to say, in my 20s, early 20s, well, late teens, early 20s, when I was desperate to find out what God wanted me to do with my life, you know, I knew he had this great plan, and if I made the wrong decision, I was going to totally miss it. And so I worried about that a lot. In fact, I freaked out a lot about it. I had a lot of anxiety. And what I've come to realize, and what I am growing into more and more, is that God wants me to make the best choice based on my personality and temperament, and based on the things that I want, as long as they're not sin, and everything else will kind of go from that. So living in the divine will of the Blessed Trinity, I realize that you're asking me something a little different, but if you want to know about that, then just do some Google searches. I mean, like I said, it's a loaded subject that I don't really want to get into in my little 15 minutes here with you. Linda says, will you do a study on the fruits of the Spirit? I may do that later. I have several kind of in mind that I want to do. After we do our Love the Word, I want to work on healing the father and the mother wound. I've been doing some contemplation, I suppose, on whether or not mother wounds are actually more destructive than father wounds. And I'm thinking that they are, actually, because we expect our fathers to be hard around the edges, but not our mothers. And when our mothers are not naturally nurturing and motherly, I don't know, I think that's probably harder on the psyche. I'm still kind of figuring that out and researching and doing some of that. But that's what I want to do after Love the Word. And then it's kind of wide open, and we'll see. So possibly how to do a study with a certain topic or a word search with a concordance. I kind of covered that in one of the others, but the other question here was, is there a software to use for concordance? And Patricia asked a similar question, what Bible software do you use? And here's another loaded question. I'm a little afraid to answer this because the software that I use is distinctly non-Catholic. It's called eSword, and I use it because it's free. There are lots of Catholic modules that go with it, though, and I have debated, and I've even said several times that I was going to share that information with you. You can actually go find the download itself on eSword, and it's free. But the Catholic modules are not as easy to find. I can't remember the name of the website, but I'll try to post that link in the posting when I post, I usually try to post these Facebook Lives to my YouTube page, which I finally, anyway, another thing. But so yes, there is a software. There is one called Verboom. That is, I actually haven't used it, so I don't know what to say about that. It's expensive. So is Logos. It's expensive. But both of those have specifically Catholic stuff. But so does eSword. You just have to look a little harder, and maybe it's a little harder to download and get started. I don't think so. I actually thought it was very easy, and I have tried Logos, and I didn't like it because it was not user friendly. And the one that the Vatican puts out is comprehensive and wonderful, but it also is very difficult to navigate, and it's not user friendly unless it's changed in a few years. I will, some of that is also covered in the book Ignite. So I don't know, we'll talk about maybe doing a whole series of informative, I don't know, maybe small shows or something on that. I don't know. But I realize why you want to know, and I'm going to try my very best. We might actually just do a one-on-one, Linda, okay? All right. I want to answer this too. Poor Julie has been hanging on for several weeks. If you could name just one saint who inspired you early on in your vocation to keep going, who would it be and why? Well, as a non-Catholic, I would say early in my vocation, I, first of all, didn't even believe in the whole saint thing. And so I can't say that I really, twofold. One, there wasn't a saint really that I felt drawn to, but two, I didn't have any idea about vocations either. So I was ready to sacrifice my whole family on the altar of following God. And there were times when I spent 40, I'm not exaggerating, 40 and 50 hours a week studying the Bible. And I would look up and it was 4:30, almost 5 o'clock in the evening, and my husband was about to be home, and I hadn't had a shower, I hadn't done the dishes, I hadn't done any laundry. I mean, it was crazy. And the Lord, even as a non-Catholic, He came to me and said, you know, we need to look at this. You're a little out of balance. And so I didn't really understand that, because I felt like, you know, I think like many non-Catholic pastors do, that when you're called by God to do something, you sacrifice everything for it. But I didn't have the teaching of vocations in the church. So later on, as I did come into the church, and as I was actually making the transition, I credit that whole thing with John of the Cross, really, a lot of that vocational focus, because I had suddenly the teaching of the church, but also I had John of the Cross who, oh gosh, I mean, I just picked up his stuff, and the first time I began to read it, I thought, I have never been taught like I was taught and have been taught like him. He is the number one, he's my patron, and that's why I took his name at confirmation. So Sonia, John of the Cross, Corrette. So he's it. And then there have been others, but he's really the main one. And I've thought about this question a lot, because it's sort of been hanging in the background. I lost it last week. I knew I had it there, but I lost it. And so I've been thinking about it a lot. He's definitely number one, but you know what I've noticed is he is very quiet. I have prayed specific prayers for his intercession on a couple of things, and I don't know. I don't hear a whole lot from him. I don't get any signs. And I actually asked him, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I asked him to give me a little sign, you know, are you there? I think he's just naturally, because he's so contemplative, I think he's probably naturally very quiet, and I bet I get on his very last nerve. So I would say I'm drawn to him. I don't know so much that he's drawn to me. All right. 2 people asked about suffering. So I'm going to spend, I think, the last bit of this video, the Facebook Live here, on this particular topic, because it was a huge relief coming into the Catholic Church to discover a theology of suffering. I grew up with the whole name it and claim it, prosperity gospel. We didn't actually necessarily ascribe to it in my denomination so much, but we were exposed to it all the time. It's always on television, PTL, back when PTL was big, all of that. It's very, it's just very prevalent. So suffering was just not something that we had a good handle on. And I know when God began to teach me about it, it scared me a lot, Because, I mean, I go straight to the end of the road. I'm going to lose my whole family. They're going to die in a car accident, and I'm going to have leprosy. I mean, I go all the way to the extremes. So when I think of suffering, I think of suffering. And most of what we do is it's not really suffering. Now, there is that whole purgatory kind of suffering that I talk about a lot. The daily sufferings that we do, the suffering, actually the specific question was, Lacey said, does it mean to give up what you want, have, or think you want for the good of another? Yes, it does mean that. Or does it mean a tragic event that causes pain? Well, it means that too. The cool thing about offering up our suffering, which is what the Catholic Church tells us to do, we offer up our sufferings, small and big, all of them. I mean, listen, this whole Mary Journal thing, I offered up so much suffering for that, and I think that's why she gave it to me, because the whole Love the Word journal thing is, I think it requires an extra dose of suffering in order to make it fruitful and creative. So to make it rich, for people. So it does mean offering up your little stuff and those submissions that you offer to God when you don't feel like it. I mean, I had a necklace once that I absolutely loved. My mother gave it to me, and I loved it. I wish I had it back sometimes. I just loved it that much. And God, he was trying to teach me generosity. And Joyce Meyer, of all people, had said something about, just giving stuff away. She always gave stuff away. And I was like, all right, well, I can try that. Well, then he asked me to give away that necklace. And I was like, now, wait a minute. That's not what I meant. But he kept on about it, and so finally I was like, all right. So it took a long time. I kept trying to tell God it was because my mom gave it to me, but it wasn't. It was because it was pretty and I liked it. And I didn't want to give it away, but this particular person kept admiring it every time I wore it. And so I finally said, all right, I'm going to give it to her. And as soon as I made the decision, I was excited about it and I couldn't wait to give it. But then I didn't see her for a while. When I finally did, I gave it to her, and something miraculous happened spiritually. I had been really needing a breakthrough in a specific area of sin. And when I gave her that necklace, something happened, and it was like suddenly I had this ability, this grace that I hadn't had before. So suffering can entail very small things, or things that should be small but are big to you. Or it could mean the road rage that you sacrifice on the altar, or it could mean a major tragedy. All of those things contribute to what we mean by offering up our suffering. Now, why that's important is the Bible tells us, St. Peter says, that he who has suffered well has been purified of sin. He doesn't sin anymore. So we see there the principle, and that's not the only place, but one of the places, the principle that suffering can purify us of sin. And it does. I mean, I was thinking about this week too, and I thought, nothing makes me more contemplative, more quiet in my soul and in my spirit than when I'm suffering. And the more you suffer, the more still you get, if you suffer well, or creatively. I shouldn't say well, because I don't know, do any of us suffer well? I don't suffer well. I yell and scream and cry and bawl and throw things the whole time. But creatively, I should say creatively. And when I say that, I mean offering up our suffering in union with Christ's. I didn't say that earlier, so for those of you who are non-Catholic, that's what we mean when we say that, offering it up. So when we offer up our sufferings in union with Christ, they become creative, they become fruitful, they become redemptive, not only for us, but even they can also do that for other people. And so when St. Peter says that he who has suffered creatively or well has ceased from sin, he means that suffering can help purify us when we offer it to God. He uses it for that purity. And that's what we mean. That's what the church talks about. When she talks about purgatory, that's all it is. So yes, Mary Pat said, what pops out at me is the closer you get or want to get to our Lord, suffering is involved. It's taken me many years to understand and now accept that this is the case. But the thing is, we all suffer. The difference is it just bitterness? Is it just pain? Is it just crappy? Or is God going to be able to do something with it? And God will do something with it if we give it to him. But otherwise it's just pain. And that's the beauty of all that Jesus came to do. He didn't come down here to make it all clean and pretty and sparkly and glittery for us. He came to change our suffering into something that could help us live forever. And that's the mystery of it. It is a great mystery. Suffering is a mystery. I don't claim to know the answers. I do know, though, because John of the Cross taught me, and I am still learning, and I'm still offering, and I'm still suffering like everybody else. I am learning that it's not only purifying, it does bring us closer to God, and that's why. So the other thing too, and I mentioned this, I believe, last week, and it's been on my mind. Maybe I've said it 2 or 3 times, and you've heard me say it 100 times, but suffering, then, purgatory, I say this a lot, purgatory is a person. So the suffering that we experience is because, I want to make sure, watch my time, the suffering that we experience is because the things that God offers us are intended for good, but our wills are not one with his. And so we resist what we've been offered. Once we have submitted our will to God, then the suffering, even though it's still suffering, somehow it takes on a whole new light, and you're willing to do it because you know it's good for you or someone else. Now, I'm going to give you one example, and then I have to go. But in the instance of, say you've had for instance, my husband had a big screaming match with a neighbor because we have a neighbor who has a dog. You know, we live way out in the country. We have a neighbor who has a dog who comes to our house every single night and craps in our front yard right where we walk. So, you know, we've already been over there once, and we like to be good neighbors. We have good neighbors. We really do. It's just this one dog, you know, and he's sneaky. He's very smart. He's a smart dog. So we have been over there, and everything was fine for about a week, and then the dog kept coming. Well, we have one of those cameras, those hunting cameras that takes pictures of movement at night. So we have him on camera. So all of these things were happening with the Love the Word journal and all of this drama at my house. My son had a wreck, all this stuff. So all the stress was like up here. And then this happened. So I walk outside the other morning, and the dog has not only is he crapping in the front yard, now he is on the back stoop. So you can't walk out the front door or the back door. All right, so where was I going with this? All right, so we're suffering with this dog, right? And my husband is just, he just can't take it, not another moment. So he takes the picture from the camera, he downloads it, and he prints it. And he stalks over to the neighbor, I mean, immediately, you know. So he goes over there, and they had this screaming match, and my poor neighbor, I mean, well, anyway, that's not my dog, he said, which made my husband even more mad. And it was just this, and I have this anxiety because of all this stuff that's going on, and I'm trying to get, I've got so many things that have to be done in a certain timetable, and he's mad about this, and they're mad about that, and I'm trying to do all this, you know, so I'm suffering, they're suffering, we're all suffering, right? And the whole time I'm going, dear blessed mother, please take this suffering and make it for their good, and I'm thinking of you, you know, when I'm doing that. So I'm suffering. And it's minor stuff, you know, I mean, this is not big stuff. This is no tragedy. Nobody's died, you know, nothing awful. So it's small stuff, but it builds. And you know how this is. Your days, and especially if you have 1 or 2 of these in a row, it gets to be like this pressure cooker, and you just know you're going to lose it. And that's what my husband did. And so I was suffering because he was suffering. So, however, I knew that to say anything to him was going to make it worse. So I'm also suffering that. And I haven't seen him do this in a long time. Now, my husband does this with me, but he doesn't do it with other people. So he goes and he bawls out this neighbor, and he has a right to be perfectly honest. The neighbor gets mad because, he didn't want it to be his dog. We had proof, but he didn't want it to be his dog. But the neighbor he denies that it's his. That makes my husband madder. He comes home, he thinks about it for about 2 hours. Now, I didn't know he did this, But my husband goes back to the neighbor and he asks for forgiveness. So my husband suffers then the humility of going to the neighbor and asking for forgiveness for chewing him out, screaming his head off, and causing a scene in the middle of the yard over this dog. So I realize that those are small ways, and I hate to out my husband like this. He's going to kill me. But those are all ways. See how we're all suffering for the good of the other. I'm suffering on behalf of my family. My husband is too, because he's having to fix the car that my son wrecked. My son is suffering, so we're all suffering. The neighbor's suffering my husband. My husband suffers the neighbor because the neighbor lies and says it's not his dog, and that just makes him worse. Then he has to suffer the humility of going over to the neighbor and asking for forgiveness, which he didn't really have to do, but he did. And I was very proud of him because, like I said, he does that with me and he does it with our kids. But I don't know that I've ever seen him do that with somebody that he doesn't know very well. So I was very proud of him. But all right, so that was the long answer, and I actually went 20 minutes and I didn't mean to. So I will get to the other questions. How do you decide where to read the Bible in each day? I can't find the best way to read the Bible. Why do some Christian religions have a disdain for Mary? I've covered that quite a bit actually in a couple of shows, but I'll mention it next week. And I'm sorry I went long. That suffering thing, that's a big old subject. So I'll see you next week.